Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Top Cyber Pro podcast. I'm Jim West, founder and CEO of TopCyberPro.com, and our guest today is Aaron Lippold. Hopefully, I got that last name right. And he
Yep.
is going to, introduce himself, what he does, and this is a great thing that a tool, and really it's a framework that he's going to be giving us kind of a light crash course in and telling us the what and why. And I'll leave it to Aaron. So.
Hey, so thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. So my name is Aaron Lippold. I am the creator and chief engineer of the MITRE Security Automation Framework, which is an open source collaboration that MITRE, the FFRDC for the federal government, has in collaboration with industry, the defense industrial base, and the open source community to help bring more automated and machine-driven cyber and cyber awareness, cyber posture, and security automation tooling around the concepts of things like DevOps, DevSecOps, all those kinds of cool things. So it's a collection of tooling and lessons learned that we, the community, have learned over the last 15 or 20 years about how to best bring all these tools together so that you can actually have good cyber posture and then build that into your workflows. So
One of
happy.
oh, sorry, Aaron, to interrupt you, but I wanted to kind of touch on MITRE a little bit because that's really important for people to understand. If you're hearing about MITRE for the first time, and I know a lot of cyber professionals have heard of MITRE, but if you're brand new and you're just learning about cybersecurity, getting your journey, moving into a career in the cyber industry, and this is the first time you're hearing about MITRE, I implore you to Google them, go to their website. They have a plethora, well, not even plethora, I would say a cornucopia of all these fantastic tools that's open source and largely free to use.
Mhm.
They've already been paid, they've been funded, they've created this for anybody in the industry. So MITRE is a phenomenal organization that does all of this to advance frontiers in cybersecurity. So I just kind of want to lay that foundation. And Aaron is like a chief senior engineer for this great, wonderful organization, and he has created this thing called Security Automation Framework. So he's going to go into a little bit more of it, and I didn't mean to interrupt you, Aaron, but I just kind of want to lay the foundation for anyone brand new hearing about MITRE for the first time. They're a fantastic, fantastic organization. So with that being said, I'll let Aaron continue. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No problem. No, I mean, it's a wonderful organization. I mean, MITRE's been around since the 50s. We helped build everything from the internet itself to GPS, to everything in between. We were actually, I think, the first .org domain in history. So all kinds of cool history around there. So check us out at mitre.org, and you can learn more. So the specific capability area that we're going to be talking about, and let me just readjust in my chair a little here, is the Security Automation Framework under saf.mitre.org. You can check that out in the link below. And we can talk about how we have started to bring together this cornucopia of research that we've done in helping define what is DevOps, what is DevSecOps, how do you use all the open source tooling in the community. But in addition to that, we, as part of that work stream, have also started to do some of our what we would call normal MITRE things, right? So MITRE has a tendency to not only help the government agencies, sponsors in the intelligence community, et cetera, build out capabilities, but we're also responsible for helping define things like policy and specifications and standards, right? So something you might be very familiar with is like the MITRE ATT&CK framework or MITRE DEFEND, or things like the MITRE work that we've done with the Open OASIS project in the UK, which is a standard internationals body where we're doing things like STIX and TAXI, right, which are heavily used inside the industry. So the Security Automation Framework has started to develop its own data format in that same vein for security risk information sources, which we call the OASIS Heimdall data format, for unifying the security data of multiple different tools into a common machine readable format. We normalize it so that, like, if a tool says critical versus high versus super duper important, we all just call it high.
Yeah.
Right? To keep it simple, right? It's like, let's communicate consistently. So the SAF itself is broken up into multiple pillars, and that pillar that we just talked about, which is the kind of most MITRE part of this, is the normalization pillar. So on the other sides of those pillars, we kind of build in technology and capabilities around the software development lifecycle. So everything from the planning phase to the configuration management or hardening phase to the security validation phase to then the normalization phase. And then great, now once we have all this data, how do we look at it in a common and consistent way? And then we have the visualization capability, as part of that. And then the next pillar we're going to be bringing out through some collaboration we actually did with Lockheed Martin is the operationalization pillar in a collaborative application that we built with them, which we're going to be calling TIR, TIR. And we'll put a link to all these different applications and tools down there so you can go take a look at them. But we've continuously tried to work with industry, everyone from AWS and Amazon, Microsoft, Sophos, Progress, Broadcom, VMware, all kinds of different industry partners to include defense industrial base contractors like Lockheed Martin, Booz Allen Hamilton, SAIC, right? We're all kind of marching towards the same goal of how do we make better cyber and IA decisions and security decisions, and how do we work together? So the role that we, MITRE, and the SAF play is as much a facilitator of collaboration within the community and education. So one of the things that I know we wanted to try to talk a little bit about today was just like some of the training that we've done in the open source training. I think that's much in line with kind of the work that you do.
Yep.
But we're doing a different kind of training where we're talking about, well, how do these things get developed? How do these security baselines get built? How do they come into existence in the world? If you need to build one on your own, how could you do that? All that kind of stuff. So we're much of the work that we do is around trying to self-enable the cyber analyst and the cyber engineer to be able to serve themselves for what they need to do. And that's one of the main reasons that the federal government and the other services and even the defense industrial base, usually for-profit companies, are seeing value in doing this open collaboration because this challenge isn't any one thing a single organization, company, or even agency can solve on its own. Collaboration needs to happen. So that's what we try to facilitate. And that's why we make a lot of this capability available for free. And we give the training for free because I use it as a way for you as a cyber professional to cross-connect with other cyber professionals and expand your network, right? And then grow your ability to talk to others.
So listen to everything Aaron just said. It's free to use, free to learn about it, free training, free, free, free. There's absolutely no excuses for you to at least spend 10, 15 minutes dipping your toe into the water of what this tool is, and then quickly making a decision. Hey, is this something that help my current role and job or not? But hey, it's right there, and all the links will be in the description. There's a lot of things, Aaron, I want to unpack what Aaron just said, because when he talks about industry, he's mentioned the defense contractor base. He's mentioning, all these other organizations, government and federal, that all come together and with industry collaborate to make these tools and to help shape them. And that's extraordinary because for a long amount of time, from several presidents ago, they've all pushed for more collaboration with industry, because whereas industry is developing AI and other emerging technologies and machine learning, and now it's being brought into for federal government use, of course, because everybody needs to leverage the benefits and all the positive things about emerging tech, as well as come up with the standards and the baselines and making sure we secure these things. So for a long time, cloud got a lot of love from all the industry and all these organizations to try to figure out what's that common language we're all going to talk in. And so I'm going to throw out some frameworks that was like old defense stuff. So this stuff was called like DITSCAP, DIACAP. Then they migrated, the DoD migrated to a DoD version of RMF, if you will, that's based upon the NIST RMF. And in all these frameworks, there's just a plethora and just a magnitude of all these security controls with different levels of granularity, if you will, but based upon usually a categorization, right? You'd have to, and by categorizing kind of how much uptime, confidentiality, reliability you needed in the system, that would also dictate the strength of those security controls that are supporting those security principles. Well, the problem is these, like the NIST RMF is kind of I'm going to say it's a one shoe fits all. It's trying to fit all of these different systems and different platforms. But the issue is, as emerging technology changes industry, changes, the way we leverage these tools, just like cloud, and now we have developing apps in the cloud. When you mentioned SecDevOps, we have all these
Mhm.
new processes that now need to be secured. And so as technology, processes, and operations change, so we have to also tailor and change. But when we tailor, the bad word of tailor starts to become either, silos get up in different industries and different people want to approach it differently. But when MITRE comes and brings all these people to the table and say, hey, let's come up with a collaboration here so that we all can use this. So that way it's not Raytheon doing one thing and Air Force doing a different thing, and then some other company, doing it. Like, you don't want like 20 different ways of trying to do the same thing at the end of the day, because we all want to make things secure. And he brought up baselines. He brought up making policies and standards. These are all great foundational things to build upon as you're building these things. But the big question I have right now for you, Aaron, is why SAF though? I mean, it sounds cool, security automation framework, and who wouldn't want to automate handling and addressing security in the system? So what's the big why that people need to know about SAF?
So I think you brought it up earlier, right? Is basically everybody has this requirement, right? Regardless of what you call it, no matter what company you're working for, no matter what customer that you're trying to serve, right? You have a set of rules of engagement, business processes, requirements, and security needs that you need to address for that organization and for that agency. Um, and you need a pattern of work to be able to do it constructively, right? Just like Henry Ford, when he started to build out the first pipelines of work for
Mhm.
the auto industry and normalizing how he did things and made it simple as possible and built a system around how he did that work so that he could do things like change management, quality control, innovation, right? Fast iterative change. The industrial base figured this out a long time ago, right? That's why we get really fast products and we get ketchup at 1,000 miles an hour and 10,000 cars a day and all that kind of stuff. That those same patterns are the same reason we need to do this with cyber, because those assets in our industry and in our environment, um, and fundamentally in our economy and for our country, are things that operate what we do every day, right? If you walk down the street, you're interacting with hundreds of IT systems and secure systems that maintain, hold, and transmit your personal information. And if we're not hardening and validating and putting together a set of standards and work processes to make sure that those things that we push out, that everybody in the world uses, from everything from turning their lights on and off to opening their garage doors to going to the bank and transferring hundreds of dollars, or protecting our missile silos, right? And we don't do this in an organized way with checks and balances, right? And the ability to react to do cyber threat in a way that's effective and repeatable. um, we will be lost, right? So, and it's becoming increasingly important because we're becoming increasingly dependent on these IT and infrastructure systems because they run everything in our lives. We're not quite at Skynet levels, but we're getting darn close, aren't we?
Yeah.
Um, so I think it's important for us to say, well, instead of every organization and every industry having to repeat itself and continuously come up with 10 different ways to do a good job at one thing, to say, well, where can we share? How can we streamline what we're doing and make things consistent? And then where you want to go innovate, you can go innovate on the edges,
Mhm.
right? But the core things, we should make sure we're all doing well together.
And that kind of efficiency, if you will, and the speed can now match the speed of which companies and businesses want to adopt and leverage new applications, new technologies into the fold. Because doing it the old way with checklist and having to do the manual way of a team of 3 to 5 people, and then you got security control assessors and auditors, and you still need these people in the different layers of a system, but to have this very formalized and human driven component, trying to leverage a framework that's going to bring you speed, efficiency, and still give you that assurance of security is tremendously important. Because I can remember, 5, 6, 7 years ago having to do a RMF package in EMAS, and it just took forever. It would take 4 to 6 weeks on average to go through all these controls and have to collect all these artifacts. Whereas now, as more and more tools are being built in, like Azure, SharePoint, and all these other apps that are, collaborative apps building tools, you now have the ability to automate the code testing and all that analysis, instead of having to try to have, a team of coders, review their own code. Humans were to err as human. So could you maybe speak more, since you brought up DevSecOps, and there's two. How's the problem? Is it DevSecOps or SecDevOps? Because I kind of hear it both ways online.
So when I originally started using that term, originally it was operational development was the original military term for it before we published it to the rest of the world. And then when industry got a hold of it, they liked, DevOps, you know, and then DevSecOps and, all the other star insert in the middle. So a lot of people will flip it around, right? Because they want to try to put a focus, right,
Yeah.
on this, that, or the other thing, right? When we originally said DevOps, we meant operation, development towards operation, right? Operational development. And security is always a part of that, right?
Always
But
embedded. Yeah.
industry kind of forgot that. So then we said, hey, DevSecOps,
Okay.
right? To remind you, hey, you don't get to skip security just because you're moving fast.
Yes.
Because what it really means is I want you to embed your unit tests and your functional tests and your operational tests into your release process and your acceptance process, which isn't a crazy idea because we've been doing that in software for years. So
Yep.
why this is a fight or why it was ever a fight just blows my mind. I don't get it because it's not like code to the test is a new idea, right? And test-driven development and TDD, right? Because this is what we were talking about in the Agile Manifesto and what we were trying to do in terms of streamlining software operations. But you can go as far back as like the Apollo missions, and they were using Agile test-driven development methodologies all the way back to the Apollo program itself in 6-week sprints, right? There's some great articles and talks that was given by an older developer that I really love, and I reference a lot of time for my younger engineers of Robert C. Clark, and he talks about the evolution of the computer science industry and and then eventually the cyber industry, and why things like originally the computer science industry was primarily female driven, right? It was like an 80-20 mix, right? And the 20% guys, right, were originally just, converted engineers or mathematicians. And then as we started to develop as an industry, we started to bring in younger engineers. And waterfall is actually an outcome of the fact that we had younger engineers that had less practical experience about how to do things like task management and organization of product delivery and testing and all that kind of thing because they just didn't have the work experience, right? So it started as agile, went to waterfall to kind of put guardrails against these new young people, right? And then now we're going back to agile again. So I think it's, everything's a circle. I think it's really cool. Um, and it's cool to see kind of how the history of all this type of stuff
Evolution,
and how it
right?
comes
You know,
through.
you mentioned the
Yeah,
testing. The first thing that came to my mind was the EAL, the assurance level, evaluation
yeah,
assurance level. So that was like 0 through, I think it was like 7. It was like formally
yeah.
tested and etc. And of course, most applications during that period of time when they were using that, I think it was like EAL 2 was like, but like 90% of apps was like I think it was functionally tested or operationally tested. I forget the word they use. I think it's functionally tested at level 2. So you had 0, 1, and 2. 0 was nothing.
Mhm.
1 was, I think, structurally tested, and then functionally tested was 2. And that was
Right.
like 90% of the apps out there. And then over time, people had to raise the quality bar because of bugs, of restarts, and people won't. If it's a flashlight app and it will not turn on 10 out of 10 times, you're going to get rid of that app. And so that's what happened. People started rejecting apps that didn't work consistently, so the integrity had to raise. But it's interesting to see that
Mm-hmm.
evolution. In regards to, let's just talk specifically because, let's go, excuse me. I know one of the components, one of the apps or tools that are in SAF is the eMaster. Could you speak maybe a little bit about that, and then we can talk about maybe some of the other components and tools?
Sure. So eMaster is a subcomponent of the SAF CLI. So the SAF CLI is a collection of utilities and tools of how do I work with all this information and do common things I need to do. So it has the ability to do generation of security testing stubs from benchmark documents. It has the ability to take output from various tools and convert it into our common OHDF format. eMaster module for the SAF CLI was a collaboration that we did as an ask from the Army as part of their cloud initiative to help expose the RESTful API that eMass already had embedded into it. So when I was at DISA and we were first doing the design for eMass back in 2004, 2000 and no,
Yeah, that's about right.
yeah, around there, 2004, 2003. One of the requirements that I put in was that there had to be an API for everything. And I didn't care about SOA. I just wanted an API, right? Because Amazon had demonstrated over the previous years, right, that this API driven approach was highly effective for machine to machine integration and iterative development and unanticipated value change that could be brought to bear over the years, right? Because if you expose everything via an API for input and output, then people can be creative about how do they interface with your system in a way that you probably didn't think of when you were doing the design originally. So we made sure that there was a RESTful API at the back end in the middleware of VMAS, but we didn't really publish it in fairness to the government way. We put it in a Word document. And, we published it as a Word document, a controlled information Word document. So we didn't even make it public. So it kind of defeated the whole purpose. So one of the things that we did with the eMaster project was we said, okay, Army and EMAS and DISA, unsensitive this document and make it open and in the public domain. Okay, great, we did that. Now we're going to actually say, hey, let's use, at that time it was Swagger, but now it's the Open API project. We're going to make an Open API interface and build libraries for this RESTful API that's in eMass, and then we're going to publish it. So that's really what the eMaster project is. It's an Open API built integration of the RESTful API that's on the bottom side of eMass that allows you to do input and output over the network so that you don't have to go through the interface of the GUI so that you can do, machine to machine kind of communications. And that capability has always been there, just not well published and not very accessible easily to the defense industrial base. Whom we're asking to actually streamline all these workflow processes. So, it's kind of, good that we would actually make that usable. So the nice thing about the integration that we did was as a side effect, we actually published the Open API specification, and then we started building things like Ruby libraries or Python libraries or whatever Open API supported. You can go build whatever libraries you need. If you're going to go build an app that needs to integrate with eMass, you can use the eMaster libraries from the MITRE SAF to build that integration. And all you have to do is talk to the eMass PMO team and say, hey, I need an API key and a persona to use this API because it's separate from your normal login. Separation of duties, separation of concerns, right? And I'm going to do an app integration. And normally you get about a year to play around. And then every year you have to kind of refresh your need, right? And you use this API key, and then you can use the API, and then you can integrate with eMass. So So we've had all kinds of really cool users use that. I think some of the folks at Space Force took it and just built an entirely new EMAS interface that was tailored to what they were doing.
Hmm.
Um, and I think a few people from the Navy have taken it to do like poem processing, right? So to continuously update their poems a little bit easier. Other people have used it to streamline the updates of security scanning artifacts that they need in their EMAS record. So every time they do like a quarterly review or a monthly review, they have an automatic pipeline that just pushes and pulls new artifacts so that it keeps the scans fresh,
Hmm.
and those kinds of things. So a lot of times it's as much about just streamlining and removing some of the human time element and making, some of the data update and upkeep of systems and accreditation packages easier to manage. It's not about fully automating it from end to end because there's always a human element, right, to an accreditation package, agreements, social things, that kind of stuff. But everything that you can remove in terms of cruft, right, is a win,
Hmm.
right? Because every counts. So,
What are some of the other tools and components that make up SAF?
so the SAF is a framework of various tools, right? So from each of the pillars, we basically have a set of tools. And those pillars, let me see if I can maybe just screen share real
Yes,
quick.
let me make you the host real quick, and you'll be able to share your screen.
Yeah, let me just quit out of my all my other applications so that I don't get any uh interruptions.
No worries. So while Aaron's pulling up his screen, he's going to share some information with us. Again,
Mhm.
we're going to have every link that Aaron's going to talk about is going to be already right there in the description below. So feel free at any point to pause the video, open up a new tab, click the links, start exploring because that's the real key to learning, right? Being curious, checking it out. I always tell people give it 10, 15 minutes, do a quick evaluation and read up about it and learn enough to make a quick decision. Do you want to continue down the path of learning more about this tool? And if so, go to the training section on the site that's going to be at the SAF page, and you'll see their schedule of all the different classes that are completely free and open. Just click a button and register for a class, and then continue learning about this great framework and tool that Aaron and MITRE has brought to the public. So I see he's got his screen there, so I'll give it back to you, Aaron.
Wonderful. So, as we were talking about before, the SAF is organized in a set of basically what we call pillars of planning, hardening, validation, normalization, and visualization. So, each of the pillars has a concept of how does it interact with things like the RMF and the software development lifecycle, but then it usually has a um, set of capabilities or applications that we organize around it. So Vulkan is the first application in the from left to right, and that helps you create security benchmarks. I'm actually trying to find, we have a nice high level graphic. Here we go. Here we go. We can talk to it just right here.
Okay.
Um, so we have the planning capability, which has the Vulkan application, which we wrote in partnership with VMware. And this
Nice.
helps you take general security guidance, SRGs. I don't know if you remember having to grab an SRG
Yep.
because there wasn't a STIG and
Resource
then put it
guides.
into this, yeah, put it into the STIG viewer and then fill it out and create a checklist and all that manual work. So what we did was we created a web application that allowed you to take an SRG, actually write your own STIG, what would be the equivalent of a STIG. And then once you have that, you can then publish that as part of your organization, and that's aligned to the SRGs. So that means it's aligned to the RMF and the 853 controls. It's just as rigorous as what a formal STIG would be. The only real difference is you didn't go through the peer review process with DISA to say, hey, did you cover everything? Right. But DISA allows this and it calls it STIG ready content, right? Because just like you could take an SRG and create a checklist and you're making your own decisions, well, I just gave you an app to make it easier for you to actually create a STIG ready STIG based on your own work. And then you can do the same processes just like you can with the other tools that we have in the SAF to be able to create automated hardening and automated validation for that new thing, for that new component or SRG ready content, which you could then, put into this same workflow. So that's what the Vulkan tool is for. And like VMware and Progress, and I think even Microsoft and Google are using Vulkan to help manage their STIGs that they publish to the rest of the community. So if you see a VMware STIG, it was written in Vulkan. And that's how their team collaborates. Because rather than using an Excel spreadsheet, which is normally how you do it with the DoD, to fill in all these check texts and fixed texts and all that, we just built a web app around it so that you could have a team,
Nice.
so that nobody's editing the wrong Excel spreadsheet, so that we can tell who made what change and when, and you could do peer review. So that's what the Vulkan app is about, is it helps you author STIGs. And we have had some folks say, hey, well, couldn't we also author CIS, or couldn't we also author this? Sure, we could. But the CIS Foundation has a really nice web-based CIS workbench tool, which basically does the same thing. So we didn't want to recreate the wheel. So we focus on STIGs, CIS does CIS and all that. And then for the hardened capability, we don't try to reinvent the wheel. We just integrate with standard open community tooling like Ansible or Chef or Puppet or Terraform. And then for validation, we primarily use InSpec for validation. That was one of the languages I helped develop with Progress, Chef, and Deutsche Telekom years ago, as kind of a replacement for SCAP and XCDDF. And so the validation framework uses InSpec as the validation language, but we also support things like, the original project that I helped DISA start, which was XCDDF and Oval and SCAP many years ago. We support those legacy tools as well, as part of the validation area. And then we've already talked about normalization. And then finally, we've got Heimdall in terms of the visualization, and I can give you guys a quick screen share of that if you want as well.
Sure.
But it takes all the data that we get from all these various tools, because in here we've got validation for STIG testing, but that's not the whole part of the security pie. So other tools like third-party tools like Burp Suite, SonarQube, OAuth if we take a look at normalization, we see that we support many, many, many formats.
Yeah.
And let's see here if I can get the nice pretty picture. Where is my pretty picture? There it is. All these different kind of security data formats and toolings, and this isn't the whole collection, but it gives you an idea.
The most usual suspects.
Right. So these are your big suspects. I have this security tool, Sync or SonarQube or Burp Suite or X-Ray or this. I want to convert it into a common format so then I could take those results and then use them as part of my standard business process, right? Whatever I want to do with the data, right, wrong, or indifferent, good, bad, or ugly, right? I need to be able to operate on this information. So, and then I need to build a process around it.
So, Aaron, I have a question, and I might be a little off, but I think we're adjacent or very close. So the question I have is, I think Air Force for DoD was the first one to come out with, I think it's their OneNet for their CATO or continuous ATO. Is this like a way that it can be leveraged for acquiring a continuous ATO, as you may have heard of the term? Or are we kind of off?
No, the concept of continuous and ongoing authorization was one that DISA had talked about originally we put that in the 2008 and 2009 strategic plans. And I remember originally when we were trying to come up with the name for it, and it was Richard Hale and Dave Mihalsic. And this was one of the reasons that they supported and funded like the SCAP and XCDDF and Oval projects with NIST, why we funded out of various funding mechanisms, companies like Puppet and Chef, and eventually Ansible, to provide the tooling and the capabilities in the commercial space to be able to enable this concept of we need to automate as much as we can and make this as quick as we can. And I think we were talking originally about the concept of just, well, how do we take all the data that we currently have and streamline it But eventually we knew we would get to this concept of continuous and ongoing authorization. Um, and so these ideas have been around for quite a long time. And Platform One is a great example
The
of the
platform
Navy
one, thank
Air
you for the
Force,
correction of name.
right? Taking these concepts, these higher level concepts, and going, okay, how would we implement that? Okay, Platform One says we're going to do Kubernetes, and we're going to do hardened container and hardened container pipelines. And how do we make that as a service? And how do we make it easier for people to build environments that encapsulate these kinds of concepts of operation and do DevSecOps and the testing and all the stuff that is needed, right? Kessel Run is another example program where the Air Force tried to do some bleeding edge work. The Navy and the Coast Guard, right? Black Pearl and all kinds of really cool activities have been, built around that. So, um, a lot of these programs are just implementations of these really good ideas that a lot of people have had over the years. And so it's great to see folks trying to bring these ideas and these concepts into reality.
But if an organization, whether federal defense that has to do RMF, if they wanted to leverage SAF to help them,
Hmm.
gather the documentation, because there's a list and the process to go for a CATO. Would this
Yep.
be a great start for them to learn about SAV and get immersed into it and leverage it for that? Like I said, I see that infrastructure as a service. I think that's one of the major
Mhm.
components of testing the code for any of these systems.
Yeah. So, as we've been talking through these concepts, in order to achieve CHEO, you need to have the infrastructure. Infrastructure is code, testing is code, software builds, software pipelines, all these kinds of things need to be part of that process, right? Because you need to have the ability to build, test, harden, validate, secure, and verify, and then produce proof, right? To build that workflow, right? So whichever tooling you use, be it, I'm going to be a Microsoft shop and I'm going to use their tooling, or I'm going to be an Azure shop or an AWS right? Every platform has their answers for a lot of these types of processes, right? AWS has its what's it called? Code, code runner, right?
Mhm.
Azure has their own version of it. Oracle, right? And Oracle
Yeah.
Cloud have their own versions, right? But a lot of the concepts and a lot of the things they're using under the covers are a lot of the applications that we try to demonstrate. How do you wire them together? How do you go from A to B to C to D,
Mhm.
right? And how can you take these open standard tools and build them into whatever platform you choose? That's fine. If you
Mhm.
guys are GitLab Shop or GitHub Actions or Jenkins, whatever, you need something that does configuration management. Okay, pick one. You need something that does, right, security validation. For configuration, you need static analysis, you need dynamic analysis. So what we've tried to do with a lot of that is give you a way to say, pick whatever you want and whatever meets your needs. And then here's how you can use all the outputs from those things to put them together and then have them as part of a unified workflow and business process. So these are great examples of where we can say, where do you want to put these tools together? Which ones do you want to pick? We're not trying to prescribe anything. And some of the stuff is like, well, if you want to streamline your validation and do stigging, that's a pretty complicated thing. So we've done some work there for you to help you, right? But for configuration management, that's a really well-defined space.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really matter how it got there, right? And it doesn't even really matter how you test it, as long as you have a workflow process to be able to loop through this,
Mhm.
right? And then go look at it, right?
So
So,
I know that there's some other questions that we want to get to here, but if you had
sure.
one last, like one major thing to say, like for anyone that's like still on the fence of, do I want to go and dig deeper into the SAF? What's something
Mhm.
like, what is the pitch? If you had to do like an elevator pitch to anyone out there watching this right now of why they need to spend at least 10, 15 minutes learning about SAF, what would that pitch be?
Well, we've made a lot of mistakes. We have a lot of pain. Um, so if you're trying to figure out what does continuous and ongoing authorization look like, what does secure DevOps look like, what does integration of all these tools that say they do everything except slice bread, and how do you put those together? We have a lot of pain and suffering and knowledge and even some successes to be able to share with you. And we hope that some of those lessons and some of that pain is something that, we can save you from. And we're not saying that we have all the answers, right? But we did put quite a bit of time into finding some of the answers. So, and we freely give it away.
Yeah.
So if you want to take a look at what does some of this work look like and some of the experience that we've been able to garner, um, we offer training for a lot of these capabilities, and we've tried to break it down into basically levels of complexity. So our user training class is really, hey, you as an operator, how would you actually use these tools and make them functional and play with them? And what do the top level ideas mean? And then if you're doing security and content authorship for security validation, here's how you actually do that work. If you're writing your own STIG, here's how you actually do that work. Um, and we even have another class that we haven't published yet, but we've given it a couple times for doing HDF converter work. And we do try to publish that up on YouTube here. So you can go kind of look and watch an entire class and just skim through it and see what seems interesting to you. And we make that all publicly available.
Love it.
And even our training courses, you can go here to either our GitHub deployment or our Netlify deployment and actually look through each of the training courses, read through it, see if anything sounds interesting to you. So yeah, definitely check out some of the training. And
Wow.
then we also offer this free. So each quarter or so, we offer training that's sponsored by one of the government agencies. So like at the end of September, the 24th, 25th, and 26th, we're actually providing training for the user class, the security guidance class, and the security advanced class um, on those days. Each class is basically a day long. Um, and the government agency pays for our time, the MITRE people, to give it. And then we open it up to the entirety of the defense industrial base. We do it over Zoom.
Mhm.
Anybody can sign up if they're doing this kind of work for the government and they want to learn about it and they want to leg up. We just sit there and talk to you for a day. We don't charge you anything. And the other really cool thing is I give you CPE credits.
Well, look at that. CPE
Right?
credits. You could bring your own lunch. It's a Zoom link. You could do it from home or your office. You could do it from anywhere. So,
Mm-hmm.
and you get CPEs. What more could you ask for? So, I hold MITRE in super high regards. If I didn't say that earlier in the conversation, and again, SAP is just one of many just tremendous tools that MITRE has provided to the cybersecurity industry. And to me, they're a giant in the industry with everything they do. But I want to take it down to you, Aaron, because you're a phenomenal person, man. And I tell you, the work that you've done into this it's exemplary. I mean, I'm just
Thank you very much.
amazed by everything you put together here. And I love that it's still growing. There was mistakes made, but lessons learned, adapted, and just kept growing and refining. The work shows. It is a very clean looking product and framework. So kudos to you and the MITRE organization for another phenomenal tool for industry. But I want to talk
Mhm.
about you, Aaron. So, thank you for sharing this, by the way, of all the SAF page stuff here. If you wouldn't mind, let's unshare the screen, and I want to kind of go back in time to like day one when a young Aaron said, "I want to do IT, cyber, and tech work." Is there a story behind that? What was that day one or the day you made that decision that this is going to be the career for me?
Oh, I didn't make that decision. I was tricked into that decision.
You was
Um,
tricked.
I was tricked into that decision. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. So originally, I was a research programmer at the National Center for Supercomputing Applications. So
Nice.
I built supercomputers at University of Illinois. So I went to University of Illinois. I got my um, math degree. So I have a degree in mathematics, computer science, English interpretive theory, and English. And I got a minor in philosophy.
Oh,
Um,
oh, nice.
because, well, I worked for the university, so I could just take classes. And
I
so
love
I
it.
just, said, what the heck?
Philosophy is
And
very
so
important, though. It helps you
it
think.
is.
Yes.
It is. That's right. And it's a very good foundation for any engineer to have, is to be able to understand how do you think critically.
Yes.
Um, right, because we like to complain about things. Oh, wait, no, we like to solve problems. But
So we got to keep the
um
solution space separate from the problem space.
that's right. And so during that time I started working on a few projects like Blue Waters, the Human Genome Project, stuff like that. We got to be able to be involved with that and that NSF research.
Hmm.
About oh, let's see, I would say in 2003 and 2004, the department decided to start looking into, and when I say the department, I mean the Department of Defense, decided to start looking into this newfangled thing called open source, which I thought was funny because it wasn't quite so new or fangled. But they recruited me to help come in and work on what is the department's position on open source technology and how do they use it and how do they use it to their advantage and that kind of thing. So I originally started as kind of an expert in that, and because of my connections to the National Science Foundation and DARPA and IARPA, I was kind of a known quantity. So I came in and I helped the Department of Defense write a lot of the open source policy that you see today. So if you look through the history, you'll see the 2009 open source policy updates and changes to the FARs and the DFARs. And as I was doing that, I was getting continuously frustrated because I had to use a Windows box, and I'd been at the Supercomputing Center for years,
Nice.
and 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 I grew up and I did my computer science on Unix
Oh,
and
Unix.
Linux. And I knew how computers were supposed to operate, and this blue screen of death stuff was not how they're supposed to operate,
It's not.
right? And so I asked my boss, "How can I run Linux?" It was like, "Well, we don't have a way to do that, because you can figure out how to harden it and get it done. Okay, fine. If you can write a script and make sure that it stays that way, okay, fine. All right." So my snobbishness of wanting to not run a Windows box and had to run, something cool like Slackware or Linux, forced me into writing a script to actually harden it. And then a few of the defense industrial base people in Booz Allen got a hold of my scripts and they were like, "This is really useful. This saves us hours." And from there, it just went downhill because then I started to get into security conversations, and then I started to, publish more work, and I
How much
started
of
to
that work or effort went into SC Linux?
quite a bit. Dan and I have had long conversations, and all that kind of thing.
One of the things,
And
if I
that
could pause
really,
you for a minute, one of the things I think, and you could correct me on the exact way it happened, but I think it was one of those quiet things that the agency published and said, this is a secure edition Linux. And of course, the internet community like obliterated it and published all the vulnerabilities. And then just quietly, they took it off because they
Mhm.
applied all of the assessments that the internet had done, and then they re-released another version of it. At least that's the story as I remember it. I might be a little bit off in the timing or the exact execution.
So the Defense Department and the intelligence community for years have been quiet contributors to the open source community in terms of areas of security and confidence and things like that. We have been publishing quietly improvements for the betterment of
Yes,
the industrial tech base. And the SC Linux project is a great example of that, mainly because it's an MLS system, so a multi-level security system, because those are highly required in terms of things like airport control systems and things that are very, very life
very
critical,
critical.
and that kind of thing. But we needed to make that accessible because the proprietary solutions for MLS systems were very, very expensive, and they were
Super
very
expensive.
hard to maintain, and they required a lot of work and effort. So the National Security Agency, the Defense Information Systems Agency, and a few others worked together to work with Linux in the Linux community, and then Red Hat and SUSE as a primary partner to build out an open source solution for an MLS compliant system that we could just give away to the rest of the world. And the NSA has been doing really cool work under what they call their CRADA, their creative CRADA, so creative research and development
Agency or
action or something
action.
like that, right? Which they have general approval to say, go release some really cool stuff to the rest of the community so that it can be embedded into the world,
Yeah.
right? Everyone can
Well,
take advantage.
if we make most systems in the world more secure, that's less systems to be
We did, yeah.
compromised and to use against you, right? It's almost like
Mhm.
rendering the enemy's ammunition invalid.
Right.
So, one of the things I wanted to ask, because I mean, you've been in a lot of different roles, wore a lot of different hats, and I mean, I know we could talk for a whole nother hour just about your career alone, but I know a lot of this is also confidential, classified, so I don't want to deep dive in there. But I do want to talk about along your journey from your days in Illinois, your from your
Mhm.
mathematics days to today. You've obviously had to have some other giants and people that mentored that you looked up to that you learned from. Do you mind maybe name dropping some of these folks if they're still with us today? And then, just people that you've admired yourself. Because I mean, you're a person worthy of being admired, but as you were going through your career, I'm sure there had been some great coaches and mentors along your path.
Oh, of course. I mean, I didn't do any of this on my own, and I did this with a lot more support that I even understood at the time. So when I first started working at DISA, I was I was a whippersnapper, as I could say. I won't swear on your podcast, but um, I walked right up to Henry Sinkowitz and Dave Mahelsick and Tony Montemurano because they were the senior executive service people that were there at the DISA career development program, like onboarding thing where they all had to talk about what their agencies and services did at DISA and all this kind of stuff. And they were like, you have to go find a mentor. So I walked up to the heads of these things. It was like, I want you guys to be my mentor, right? Specifically Tony, because he's a rough and tumble like guy from New York, and he'll give me it and no bullshit.
Yeah.
And so it was Dave Mahelsick, Tony Montemurano, Alfred Rivera, and uh, uh, Henry Sinkowitz that were really a lot of my mentors over the years and really helped me push forward. Like when we did the Forge.mil program, they were the people that helped me, do this. Folks that had come before me, right?
Mhm.
Even folks like Don Myricks. I'm sure you maybe heard of Don Myricks. She was one of the CTOs before Dave took the job at DISA. And she ended up coming to MITRE as a fellow. And so she's been a mentor to me over the years. I've also, over the years, developed great relationships with people in the industry like Josh Breschers. So he and I worked together for many years. He was at Red Hat at the time when we did things like the DoD patch repository and, declassified the CVE identifiers and, all that kind of stuff. So they were, again, more accessible to industry so that they could help build tools around stuff to make our jobs easier. Um, Anthony Skipper, when he was over at the Puppet days, I actually took my JBoss training from the folks that actually built JBoss.
Nice.
And so Luis, I should always remember his last name. I don't remember, but he ended up becoming a big guy at Red Hat and all that kind of stuff. But at that time, we were 20 years younger and, nobody had become famous yet. But yeah, so I've had wonderful support from a lot of
Wow.
different
What a
people.
lot of great juggernauts to learn from and be guided by. So, people that are watching this podcast, a lot of folks are brand new, right? My goal is to try to bring more people. I mean, my mission statement is to close the cybersecurity skills gap. And if you're brand new to cyber IT, I want you to say, hey, if you can read and comprehend, don't be intimidated by these acronyms, RMF, SAF, and you're
Mhm.
hearing about all these different companies and tech stuff, thinking that, oh, I'm not technically minded. If you can read and comprehend, you can do this. And so, when you
Absolutely.
listen to someone like, Aaron has had a tremendous career. And again, I'd love to have you back sometime, Aaron, to talk more about your career
More
because
than happy to.
yeah. But I want to kind of speed up because I know we're running out of time here, and I do want to do the speed round because I do it with every guest. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask a bunch of questions. There's just no right or wrong answer. It's just for fun. So if you're ready, we're going to go some rapid fire questions. All right. Uh,
Okay.
Star Wars or Star Trek?
Star Trek.
Star Trek. All right. Cake or pie?
Pie.
Okay. What is either your last book you read or your most favorite book of all time?
I have three actually. So in terms of just fun reading, right, Without Remorse by Tom Clancy, right, is one of my favorites. I love that book. And then my mom was a big Ayn Rand fan, so she got me into like reading Atlas Shrugged and
Yeah.
Fountainhead, and all that kind of thing. And then, yes, garbage reading. I absolutely love the Dan Brown series and all of his books, right? So I just chewed through all of those. Like I bought all of them and I literally read them
So
all. And
just
like,
every one of Dan Brown's books you've covered.
yeah, just from start to finish. It basically took me 2.5 or 3 days, and I literally didn't move for those. I just went
Wow.
crazy. Because
Wow.
I was on break or whatever. It was like graduate school was out for a little while, so I
Okay.
was just like,
So, man, beast
yeah,
in reading, a speed reader to
yeah.
boot. I want to cover any kind of. Do you have any personal projects? Because I mean, I know MITRE probably gets a full work week out of you, and you're a family man, or you have a spouse. At least that I
Mhm.
know that much. But is there any kind of personal projects that are whether they're tech related or nonprofit related? Do you do any volunteer work that you'd like to highlight?
So I've been doing some volunteer work with some of the local small businesses in my community, so they need cyber help, right? The small business sector is a sector of the United States business world that is woefully ignored when it
Yes.
comes to cyber, and they have no real way to do this because they have no idea what all this means and what's good and what isn't good and what's all that. So I try to help out there where I can. Um, MITRE also allows me to, do some cool things like mentoring. So I, try to mentor every other, every other 6 months or so, a group of like high schoolers. I've actually been able to get some of my younger cyber engineers um, to help mentor some of those high schoolers. And the nice thing is, MITRE will actually hire them as part of our intern program. So
Wow.
have,
Wow.
I have taken some high schoolers from like the advanced sciences schools and stuff like that from when they were like junior, sophomore, junior, senior, and then once they were in university, right, they continued a internship with the organization. So I've taken some of my interns from the time they were in high school all the way through graduate school, and
Wow.
then I'm in. So that's given them a plethora of experience because we're not nice to them. We just throw them right into the project, and we're like, sink or
Trial
swim.
by fire.
Right. And it's worked out pretty well for the most part, right? Because we are like, okay, if you get overwhelmed, really come talk to us. But it's been a really great learning experience because it forces them to really grow and adapt, and really develop as not only cyber people, right, but more importantly as computer scientists and as engineers and professionals. So let's see what else. What other fun personal stuff? Uh, I definitely do try to read, and try to disconnect
Yeah,
from
you know, do some
technology a little bit,
self-care and disconnect from
unplug,
it. Yeah, unplug. You know,
right?
you've got a phenomenal career, and I hope so. Season three will start in January, so maybe sometime in
Mhm.
spring, if you would do the honor of coming back. And I just want to kind of like just time jump through your career because I'm sure you just
Mhm.
have just stories upon stories to share. Before we wrap up, there was something in what you just said that is important. That's very important that I don't want to kind of let gloss over. But you mentioned how
Mhm.
small businesses, SMBs, small medium businesses, are the most vulnerable out there. So if you're watching this now and you have a family member that started a business, sole proprietorship, mom and pop shop, to someone that might have actually started a legit startup company, by all means, encourage them, share this link with them because if they might be a one-man company where they're having to do their security, the CEO, and the worker bee in the company. They should at least get acquainted with how SAF might be able to help them. There's other things that I will throw out there too that I'll put in the description below. There's a thing from Australia called Essential 8. They've also developed that focusing on their small, medium businesses because they also know businesses can't go through 100 plus controls and
Right.
understand everything. But they said, hey, if you just do these 8, you're ahead of the curve of most people. Doing nothing is the worst place you could be. So doing something is better. But Essential 8 is something that I'm a little bit of a fan of. CIS has their 20 critical security controls. I think you on one of your pages it mentioned the CIS controls as well. And then there's and not to plug something, but a colleague of mine is publishing Easy RMF, which is those analysis. I collaborated on the analysis. We looked at COBIT,
Mhm.
PCDA, SOC 2, Essential 8, multiple CSF, Cybersecurity Framework, as well as RMF. And we did
Mhm.
like 8 different security frameworks where we did the analysis and said, hey, if we could only do out of each security process group, just do
Mhm.
3 controls, and we would rank them in the most important, next important, and so forth. We did that. So we
Yep.
got 20 something controls that we say, hey, if you just do these as a small to medium business, and we give you what I call no cost to low cost suggestions or recommendations that businesses can
Right.
do. But Aaron, I think what you've done in industry is tremendous. I'm so thankful that we have you in industry because we need you and we need more people like you. And I like that you're mentoring the next generation of young minds coming up. That's tremendous. It speaks so much of your character. Before we let you go, though, is there any particular socials people can connect and follow you, or do you have a Twitter, or do you just prefer LinkedIn?
Well, I mean, you guys can get me basically at Aaron Lippold at all of them because I'm old enough that I got my account when they first started.
So you have them
So
all. So just look up his
everything
name,
on
you'll
all the
find them.
socials are,
And I
yep.
will put his LinkedIn below. Again,
Mhm.
he is just a beast in industry, and you've had my utmost respect, Aaron. I mean, you've done a lot, and so thank you so much for your time. I know your time's valuable. And again, maybe in the spring, I'd love to have you back if you would be so kind to come back again.
Oh, of
People,
course.
learn about SAF. Learn it's CPEs, free training. Sign up. Free CPEs. What more could you ask for? It doesn't cost you nothing but your time and just a little bit of reading and comprehension. So again, Aaron, thank you so much, and look forward to next time to have you on the podcast.
Well, thank you so much, Jim, and thank you for having me.